Every census has some kind of disruption or difference, but the scale at which it happened on 2020 was unbelievable.
We had the most active hurricane season in the Atlantic Ocean, impacting us during our field work, wildfires on the West Coast. And then we also had civil unrest going on in certain parts of the United States. Should we go into the field? Did we need to stop? And what was our progress in those areas?
Our goal is to make sure we count everyone once, only once, and in the right place. In 2020, with the challenges of COVID, I don't know that we would have been successful without a tool like Mojo.
Since 1790, the United States government has conducted the census of population every 10 years as mandated by the Constitution. The United States Census Bureau continues to meet this requirement to count every person living in the United States, once, only once, and in the right place. As the needs of the country evolved, the Census Bureau adapted, providing critical information to the government and its people. While it may have all started on horseback conducted by U.S. Marshals, by 1950, the Census Bureau used the first commercial electronic computer, UNIVAC, to compile some of the statistics for that year's census. By 2020, people could respond by phone, mail, and the internet. In addition to the Decennial Census, conducted every 10 years, the Census Bureau also conducts almost 100 different surveys covering the nation's people and economy. Obtaining a complete and accurate census has become more complex and difficult with each successive 10-year cycle. The Decennial Census is conducted in two very distinct parts. First, people are asked to self-respond with answers to census questions, which in the past was done by mail. For those that don't self-respond, we send staff, called enumerators, to physically visit addresses that have not self-responded to these initial requests to collect census data. This part of the operation is called non-response follow-up, or NRFU, and in 2010, it cost about $2 billion to complete. In advance of the 2020 Decennial Census, the Census Bureau was challenged to perform the census at the same cost per housing unit as a 2010 decennial, adjusted for inflation while maintaining high-quality data. In the United States and its territories, we live in very different ways in very different places. With more than 300 million people in the U.S., some closely grouped in a New York City high-rise, some living miles apart on farms that stretch across the nation's breadbasket, every 10 years we count them all. And this task is one of the most important functions our government regularly conducts. That's why the Founding Fathers put the Decennial Census in the Constitution. Before we even had warnings of what 2020 was about to become, we knew that conducting the 2020 census was going to be a challenge. A rapidly changing use of technology, an information explosion, increasing distrust in government, declining survey response rates, an increasingly diverse population, and more, led the Census Bureau to rethink its approach to conducting the Decennial Census field operations, particularly NRFU. We knew our hard work and creativity to overcome challenges would ensure each community was accurately counted in our representative democracy. Our work determines how more than $1 trillion in federal funds are allocated each year. $1 trillion. We're saying, you count, you matter. That was our mindset, that was our promise. That's what Article 1, Section 2 of the U.S. Constitution mandates us to do. We met these difficulties with long hours, hard work, a lot of creativity, and our Mojo optimizer, which leveraged machine learning and optimization techniques to drive a complete re-engineering of census field operations.
How did this innovative solution get developed? With this challenge to control costs through modernization and the embrace of technology, we came up with the plan to redesign field operations and developed the first version of the Mojo Optimizer by 2015, making it ready for field testing.
As is done for each decennial census, there are census tests that are scheduled during that 10-year period to make sure that various procedures and operations are ready to go when we go live. In 2015, the first census test using operational systems to be used in 2020 was conducted in Maricopa County, Arizona. This allowed us to validate the approach and estimate the increase in productivity and budget reductions we would achieve using the Mojo Optimizer.
After the results we achieved from this test, we engaged Princeton Consultants to validate our approach, and the Census Bureau made the commitment in 2016 to use the Mojo Optimizer in the 2020 census. The Mojo Optimizer was also tested in Houston and Los Angeles in 2016, and was finally tested in Providence County, Rhode Island in 2018.
That's it. We tested the optimizer in just 4 small-scale tests and then had to optimize the entire country.
Like any large software project, we had testing of both our functionality and our performance.
We also designed the entire system with fail-safes to ensure that no matter what, we could send assignments out to hundreds of thousands of enumerators every day.
The first night, there wasn't a lot of sleep for our team as we monitored assignments being sent out to staff, but it worked flawlessly.
Every night, the optimizer ran, assignments showed up on devices, and supervisors and managers from the first-level supervisors to executive leadership could see the results every morning.
To understand the challenge facing us, let's look at how NERFU operations were conducted in 2010.
In 2010, we hired, trained, deployed, and managed over 610,000 enumerators.
That knocked on approximately 48 million doors.
To collect data in an 8-week period.
The field supervisors who were temporary staff would meet with their 8 to 10 enumerators at a local restaurant or library every day to do everything.
Collect completed forms and timesheets, discuss the enumerator's availability to work for the week, everything. In those restaurants and libraries, new timesheets and work assignments, binders upon binders of paper maps and questionnaires to complete, were given to those working that week.
Once the field supervisors sent the enumerators off to work for the day, the enumerators would deliver completed work and timesheets to a designated location.
The field supervisors would then manually schedule, on their own, the next few days of workload and prepare the next set of binders with questionnaires and coordinated maps.
After the enumerator received their binder and paper maps and questionnaires, it would be the enumerator's discretion which days to work, what times, and when and in what order to attempt each case.
These enumerators would use paper maps to help locate the address pre-printed on the questionnaire.
Each case assigned to an enumerator was completed by only that enumerator, and they would work the case until a successful visit was completed or until they self-reported that a maximum number of visits was attempted.
They were compensated for each hour of work they reported and reimbursed for each mile driven that they reported. Everything was on an honor system.
Here's how things changed in 2020.
Data collection efforts were taken from the Stone Age to the Space Age.
Buckle your space belt and follow along.
Mobile technology was the platform that enabled the benefits of the Mojo optimizer to be realized. Geographically rooted assignments were delivered directly to an enumerator on a mobile device supplied by the Census Bureau.
With a seamless, efficient, and logical path to visit cases.
Customized to fit unique work schedules.
For hundreds of thousands of temporary and fluctuating workforce members.
Enumerators entered their work availability on their device, enabling census staff to plan for shortages and take preemptive measures to ensure completion of the operation.
Next, Mojo would collect information on the cases in a local area and assign them automatically based on staff availability and other business rules like language requirements.
This meant local supervisors didn't need to plan assignments and cases,
nor did they have to drive to a local library to deliver them to enumerators.
This more efficient process meant supervisory and clerical staffing levels were greatly reduced, requiring nearly half the area census offices to manage the 2020 census, as compared to just 10 years prior.
Communication speed increased with the ability to text message and call staff since they were provided equipment to do so.
Let's hear firsthand from our staff who experienced this change from previous censuses to the use of Mojo for the 2020 census.
In previous censuses, because it was a paper operation, you had to wait until that paper form came in, till that paper form was handled, and until that information was collected from that paper form. We had an operation called check-in, where we would have hundreds of clerical staff from across the country check in those paper questionnaires, and you would have to wait until all of those questionnaires were checked in and the data was collected from that before you could get any measure of in terms of progress or completion. Your information was only as good as probably the previous day's work. So we were a lot of times making decisions that affected hundreds of thousands of workers based on day-old or two-day-old information.
Supervisors had a responsibility then to deliver that paper somewhere else while they sent their enumerators off with their binders to figure out how they would tackle their work that week, from which days to which time in the days, and which order in which they completed it.
It wasn't real time at all. Everything was manual, and all we had to work with was what we knew at that moment.
In the 2010 census, I mean, the enumerator just make a, education guess and go there and assuming that people are going to be home.
But when we came out of 2010, we developed a concept of operation team that consisted of leadership from all areas of the Census Bureau. And one of the conclusions we came out of the 2010 census was we must be able to automate and use electronic systems for many of the things that were paper-based in 2010.
We were able to connect the addresses so that the trip by that enumerator was done in the most effective and cost-efficient way. All these tools, we had never seen them before. We didn't have them before. And it was in 2020, for the first time, that we were able to take advantage of all the technology that was in the optimizer to make our field work more intelligent, more effective, more able to complete the work.
To think of all the clerical staff that were involved in assigning cases back in 2010. We didn't need any of that in 2020, and that was due to the optimizer and its ability to efficiently assign work out to the hands of the individuals and keep them working.
But with Mojo, I think the way that they planned the route for the enumerator to go from place to place based on when mostly the respondent's going to be home. So that's going to save a lot of traveling costs. And we only go there when people are home. So it reduced the amount of time that enumerator have to visit the address. And in turn, that saved money.
It totally changed everything. The optimizer would make assignments based on geography every night, which freed up management and the supervisory staff that we didn't have to do that. And we knew that the assignments were made based on where they lived. It allowed us to see how many assignments, addresses they went to, and in the order that they went to them. There's a lot of time that's spent with people trying to figure out, well, how should I go? Where should I go? You could see where they went. So if they went one place and then they went 5 miles away and then they doubled back, you can assist them be better enumerators.
Those that had worked on the 2010 census thought it was fantastic. They loved the automation. They loved the way it worked. They saw a lot of value.
So what Mojo did was it made it possible for us to be able to better manage more efficiently in the field with the use of technology.
So the ability to remotely assign work to enumerators, coupled with, them providing their pay and time and attendance information in Mojo, all remotely, was a game changer for us. We were able to monitor real time what was happening with case completion progress and make any necessary changes on a daily basis instead of waiting for that paper flow to be captured, analyzed, and then determine what to do. So a complete and very significant improvement, innovation actually, for the 2020 census.
Automated assignment generation by Mojo meant that supervisors did not have to go into an area census office and deal with paper. They could manage data collection efforts remotely.
And enumerators entered their payroll directly on the app each day. A supervisor could also receive, validate, and send payroll for processing remotely. There was no longer a need to meet with a group of enumerators each day.
Let's summarize what we've just discussed and compare the processes of generating assignments in 2010 to the process we used in 2020.
In 2010, supervisor would manually assign cases to enumerators who decided when to work and the order of their visits of their assigned cases.
Each enumerator would work a case until completion, either a successful visit where data was collected, or until a designated number of failed attempts was completed.
In 2020, enumerators entered when they wanted to work, and the Mojo optimizer assigned cases to the enumerators each day, based on the set of open cases.
An enumerator was not asked to keep trying the same case day after day until the maximum number of attempts was achieved.
Rather, the Mojo optimizer assigned the cases with one goal of distributing cases based on number of remaining attempts left for each case and spacing out the number of days between visits to each address.
An enumerator was not asked to figure out the order of the visits of their assigned cases. Rather, the Mojo optimizer told them the specific order and the routing of the cases they should attempt each day.
The result was fewer hours worked and fewer miles driven, reducing costs.
Each day, over the course of 12 weeks, the Mojo optimizer assigned each one of hundreds of thousands of enumerators a subset of tens of millions of cases to attempt that day.
To accomplish this, the team applied advanced analytics techniques, including machine learning and optimization, to deliver those assignments and cases.
Let's now discuss how the Mojo optimizer made this all happen.
The Mojo optimizer had several components.
The left side of this diagram shows all the different data elements that are collected and input into the optimizer.
The middle of this diagram illustrates the parts of the solution that come together to provide each enumerator's daily routes of cases.
That's indicated on the bottom.
These daily routes are then pushed to each enumerator's mobile device.
For the first time in census history, operations managers now have limitless opportunities to provide real-time route and caseload adjustments when the unexpected occurs.
In the next few minutes, our team will explain each part of the Mojo inputs and the algorithms we deployed to compute an unbeatable solution.
Early on, we utilized the 2015 work by Census Bureau's Knickie and Adams to develop an innovative model for determining the likelihood that when an enumerator knocked, someone would actually answer the door.
Our model also adjusted the likelihood to coincide with each hour of the day.
For example, in a retirement community, it's more likely that someone will answer the door in the morning, while in a community with lots of people commuting to and from work, we're more likely to find someone at home in the evening.
Not rocket science, but this attention to detail and emphasis on time management, extrapolated by 62 million households, could add up to significant savings.
Knickie and Adams models for computing these probabilities were used in the 2015 census test in Maricopa County, Arizona to validate the approach. So here we were, 5 years out, testing and refining.
These findings were then used to determine an ideal time window to visit a home. It turns out they found that a 6-hour interval maximized the sum of the probabilities as shown in the example here.
Unfortunately, the impact of these innovative models was not fully realized because of the COVID-19 pandemic, nationwide lockdowns, and people working from home. However, they won't be on the shelf for long. We're looking at deploying these insights in the 2030 Decennial Census operations.
To effectively deploy management for this huge operation, the Census Bureau divided the United States into 248 area census offices, a significant reduction in the area offices partially because of the Mojo optimizer. We'll explain that later.
These area offices were further subdivided into approximately 1,400 census field management offices, we call them CFMs for short, which are then used to manage the approximately 300,000 enumerators each day for the NURFU operation, which was expected to last several months.
See here how the country was divided into the area census offices for the 2020 census. For ease of illustrating our techniques, we will use a theoretical example showing how we typically solved a problem for small areas.
Note that due to confidentiality reasons, our example is for illustrative purposes only and does not indicate the true scale of each problem that is solved, nor does it represent any data on individual households used during census operations.
With the goal of giving a route to each enumerator each day, we needed routes that minimized the overall travel distance for the core of enumerators working each day.
So we needed a network of streets throughout the US associating both the enumerators' home locations and the locations of the case to the street network.
To meet these needs, we used ArcGIS Street Map Premium from Esri. The advantage of using this data was that it was directly tied to the underlying Mojo optimizer for routing the enumerators, as we will later explain.
The road network contained a lot of key information: time of travel and directional information, such as turning directions, one-way streets, and controlled access highway information.
We also had to tackle the problems of which open cases would be eligible for assignment each day.
Here is another typical theoretical example at a very small scale.
In reality, we had to determine how to assign roughly 43,000 cases with 300 enumerators in a single CFM.
Each open case is illustrated with a red dot and is geocoded to its location on the street network.
Within a field office, there are hundreds or thousands of enumerators who typically start and end their workdays from their homes. Their individual homes were geocoded to the road network, as illustrated here, indicated by the blue triangles.
We wanted to assign and route each of these enumerators through the thousands of open cases in their area. Sometimes, however, an enumerator may need to work in another location because there are more cases farther away from their home area.
The Mojo system's flexible start locations for each enumerator empowered managers to deploy enumerators where they were most needed. This fluid approach to work assignments was a game changer as management could shift staff in response to natural disasters and the COVID-19 pandemic.
With more than 300,000 temporary workers, we knew we had to be exceptionally flexible with work schedules.
Each enumerator was asked to provide their availability by the hour for a day's work, and this availability could change each day. An enumerator could provide multiple times of availability.
For example, the enumerator on the left is available early in the morning and late in the afternoon. The enumerator on the right is only available during the evening.
The enumerators use their mobile devices to provide this information at least a day prior to the assignments being computed. These data were cross-referenced with caseload need and our model that predicted the probability of someone being home to maximize each enumerator's availability.
We faced a unique problem since the length of each visit was uncertain and bimodal.
When someone answers the door, a visit could last about 15 minutes or more, but if no one answered the door, the enumerator could be on location maybe 2 minutes. So all other factors being equal, 2 enumerators could spend between 8 and 60 minutes on the same 4 cases.
This led to another issue, enumerators wanting to work but running out of cases to work. If enumerators ran out of available cases, either staff would have to assign them manually or those available hours would just go to waste, neither of which was an efficient solution.
Because of this uncertainty, we assumed an average visit time of 8 minutes.
And as the field office operations evolved, we modified average visit time to coincide with the actual averages in the area. Also, for the vast majority of the duration of NRFU, we had far more visits to make than staff available to make them.
When we launched field operations, we prioritized giving enumerators enough work on their device so that they did not run out of cases during their available work times. To do this, we computed an overage parameter based on the ratio of the cases remaining to the number of enumerators as the operation progressed.
Based on the overage parameter, the enumerators' provided time windows were loaded with additional cases for those situations where they knocked on a lot of doors and no one was home. Adding yet another layer of complexity to this problem, our solution needs to work in urban, suburban, and rural environments.
An enumerator in a farming area of Nebraska will have much more travel time driving from home to home compared to an enumerator in a place like New York City, who is likely walking and can visit many cases per hour.
Our census problem is not like that of delivery companies. Any system for the census must function and produce the same results in farming communities in Wyoming, in Manhattan skyscrapers, in retirement developments in Florida, and on dirt roads in Arizona.
The Mojo Optimizer's flexible design solved this issue for us by computing travel time, assumed to be driving, between cases on an enumerator's workload.
Throughout the country, apartment complexes are loaded with units, all with the same street address.
An apartment complex may require multiple enumerators to visit the same location, but depending on the size and situation, one enumerator may be able to handle the whole complex.
We divided multi-unit cases, like apartment complexes, into equal-sized groups and treated that group as one large visit for each enumerator.
The census must also account for standalone single-family homes and 1,000-plus unit apartment or condo complexes that all have the same basic street address.
The Mojo Optimizer solved this issue by a simple alphanumeric sorting of each unit and then assigning the cases to enumerators as normal. And in the situations where an enumerator only needed to visit 1 or 2 units, Mojo would assign more work after visiting the complex.
With the description of the available data and the goal of assigning enumerators to cases to maximize their availability and reduce mileage expenses, strengthened by our models increasing the likelihood of successful visits based on contact probabilities, we found ourselves with a familiar situation.
A problem that academics term the team orienteering problem with time windows. Computational studies on that problem have been limited in scale, with the largest problems being solved having 300 locations and 4 vehicles. Our team orienteering problem with time windows was much more complex.
Within each field office, there are an average of 43,000 cases and roughly 300 enumerators. The academic literature assumes a single problem to solve. However, the census had to solve 1,400 problems per day.
Given this sheer scale, even before accounting for business rules such as language requirements for individual cases, it was clear that leveraging the existing research would not provide us with enough confidence in a solution for a problem of this size.
Furthermore, it wasn't critical for us to get provably optimal solutions to our problem, only ones that delivered efficient routes as quickly as possible.
We could not wait for an algorithm to process hundreds of thousands of cases to find a mathematically perfect solution. Those time delays were not acceptable.
Nor were they practical, as work schedules, weather conditions, and the health of our temporary workforce were all variables that changed each day. These pressures necessitated invention, leading the team to decompose the problem into smaller pieces that were, individually, within the reach of available software.
Let's now dive into the details.
The first step in decomposing a problem for each field office was to divide the open cases into clusters based on their location.
For this, we used the open source software package PyCluster that uses a machine learning technique called the k-medoid algorithm to determine the clusters of approximately equal size, represented by a medoid on the road network.
Experimentation revealed that the routing algorithm became less efficient after processing 1,000 cases, so we limited the cluster size to 900.
We determined the number of clusters simply by dividing the number of open cases by that value of 900.
Distances between cases were determined by the Haversine distance, although we did experiment with using the distances provided by Esri.
The simple example shown here shows how the cases were divided into 3 clusters, but in reality we were dividing 43,000 cases into 48 clusters.
Once the machine learning technique determined the set of clusters we needed, our next step was to assign the enumerators to the clusters. We did this via mixed integer programming using the Gurobi optimizer.
Each enumerator had to be assigned to a single cluster, and each cluster had to have one or more enumerators assigned. The distance from each enumerator's starting point to the medoid point of the cluster was used to measure distance.
The goal of the objective function was to try to match an enumerator to a cluster based on their distance, their ability to handle as many cases as possible in the time window given, and to prioritize clusters that had many remaining attempts per open case.
With our clusters determined and enumerators assigned, the final step was to route the enumerators on the street network, which could be done independently for each cluster. Within a cluster, the enumerators can be thought of as vehicles and the cases can be thought of as visits, which then defines the classic vehicle routing problem with time windows, which was referenced earlier.
The Esri ArcGIS Network Analyst extension provides a vehicle routing algorithm for this problem, and it works in conjunction with the underlying street map provided by the ArcGIS Street Map Premium package that we also discussed earlier.
The advantage of using Esri for this task is that we knew it would produce routes that were valid on the street network with travel times and distances properly considered.
As mentioned earlier, we experimented with different sizes of clusters and determined that the software performed well enough when limited to 900 cases.
Here's how all this work, technology, and ingenuity came together to make the 2020 census an historic success.
Each night, the process that was just described was executed independently for 1,400 field offices.
For each of those, the clustering algorithm was run, a MIP was solved, and multiple VRP problems were solved. For a typical field office, this sequence was completed on average in 10 minutes or less on a single server. We had 250 servers set up in the Amazon Web Services government cloud to do the required computation for the entire nation.
For each of the 1,400 field offices, the sequence of runs was kicked off at midnight in the local time zone of that CFM, with the bulk of the CFMs being in the Eastern time zone. With this architecture in place, the work for each time zone was completed in about an hour.
It is also worth noting that for each of the 3 external components, PyCluster, Gurobi, and the Esri VRP, we designed some simple heuristics to solve that part of the problem in case the external component failed.
These backup algorithms were rarely, if ever, used. Remember, we only get one shot at this every 10 years. Failure to deliver assignments on any day would have been fatal to the entire operation.
As a final challenge, and once again, unlike private sector solutions, the census does not have the luxury of slowly rolling out new features in different areas of the country. The largest test of the optimizer occurred in 2018 in Providence County, Rhode Island, with 5 field office areas in a single ACO.
It is a tribute to the Mojo team that this massively complex, robust, and reliable system was delivered at scale all at once and was able to provide 7.5 million routes to over 300,000 enumerators, corresponding to approximately 350 million planned visits over the course of 12 weeks of the NRFU operation.
You've now heard about the fantastic advanced analytic techniques that allowed us to completely re-engineer our field operations for the 2020 Decennial Census.
It took more than 5 years of planning and tests to know that this solution would deliver value.
At the release of the initial design and operational plan for the 2020 census in 2015, we estimated that the efforts to re-engineer field operations would lead to a 50% increase in NRFU efficiency, quite literally completing an average of 50% more work every single hour of the operation.
Even this ambitious estimate would turn out to be an underestimate.
By late 2019, all systems were ready to go, including the Mojo Optimizer.
Going into the historic 2020 Decennial Census, we were ready to make history.
But no one knew just how historic 2020 would become.
After the mailing and marketing campaigns to support self-response in March of 2020, non-response follow-up operations, our field teams of door knockers, were set to begin shortly after April 1st and to continue through June of 2020.
We had 3 months
with 300,000 temporary workers,
knocking on 60 million doors.
But we all remember what happened in the middle of March 2020. It changed the lives of everyone living here in an instant.
The country shut down due to the COVID-19 pandemic.
Imagine ramping up a complex symphony of training temporary workers, deploying technology, maintaining statistical accuracy, and then having to stop and enter a holding pattern, waiting for the virus to wane, and sufficient PPE to protect over 300,000 people to begin work.
And through September, in the heart of our collection efforts, the U.S. had 16 natural disasters, each causing at least $1 billion in damage. Truly historic challenges.
And once again, operations management in each of those communities had to be sensitive, as well as flexible with respect to rescheduling or the stopping of work.
Mojo's built-in flexibility and responsiveness shined like a diamond when faced with the pressure of COVID and natural disasters.
The ability to get assignments to enumerators and collect payroll without face-to-face interaction was critical in completing our mission.
And the ability to start and stop on demand was critical in managing the work environment that seemed to change daily.
We re-engineered our processes and tested the Mojo Optimizer with the assumption that the census operations would be conducted according to a plan.
Suddenly, the plan had to change.
I don't know how we could have done it without the Mojo Optimizer.
For reference, 10 years earlier in 2010, enumerators completed 1.05 cases per hour. In 2020, despite a pandemic and natural disasters, with Mojo in hand, enumerators completed 1.92 cases per hour.
This represented a gain in efficiency of over 80% compared to 2010,
and over 20% beyond our mid-decade estimate.
It's certainly possible that our results would have been even more dramatic if it weren't for those unprecedented events that threatened the success of our collection efforts.
This efficiency was crucial to our ability to overcome, to be resilient.
We are resilient.
We were also effective.
Because of the changes to the economy and population between any 2 decennial census cycles, identifying the cost-benefit of any individual change is difficult, if not impossible.
But the Mojo Optimizer was a key cornerstone of the re-engineering efforts.
Let's look at some of these numbers in perspective.
In a controlled experiment done in conjunction with the 2015 census test in Maricopa County, Arizona, Mojo alone resulted in an 80% increase in enumerator productivity. The modernized field operations, including Mojo, reduced the total number of enumerators needed from 524,000 in 2010 to 300,000 in 2020. Despite having a little over half of the staff of 2010, enumerators were still able to cover over 10 million more cases.
For the 2010 census, we needed 494 physical area offices. In 2020, The efficiencies brought about by Mojo and other changes to field operations helped reduce this number to 248.
That's nearly half, lowering the costs of leased office space and management overhead.
What does a case completion rate of 1.92 cases per hour versus 1.05 really mean?
Just looking at the number of cases in the 2020 workload, the efficiency difference between 2010 and 2020 equates to about 80 fewer hours of work for each of our 300,000 enumerators, a total reduction of approximately 27 million hours, with the associated cost savings in hourly wages.
The efficiencies didn't just extend to hours worked. Mojo produced a reduction of almost 27% in terms of miles per case from 2010.
To put that in perspective, completing the entire 64 million cases at 2010 efficiency would have taken 85 million more miles than our actual 2020 mileage, almost the distance between the Earth and the Sun.
With this extra efficiency, there were reductions in both reimbursement costs and CO2 emissions.
In the end, the 2020 census was a success, with the agency estimating that we accounted for 99.98% of all housing units and addresses nationwide at the end of our data collection operations in October 2020. And this is not just a story about how the Mojo Optimizer revolutionized our data collection. The Mojo Optimizer's performance, efficiency, and scalability during the 2020 Decennial Census has made it integral to the Census Bureau's next generation of operational control software, supporting the Census Bureau's ongoing 100-plus field data collection efforts. The Mojo Optimizer will make those operations more cost-efficient and effective, transforming our data collection efforts and reducing future budgets for our operations. The unquestioned success, the ingenuity, and the flexibility of the Mojo Optimizer has demonstrated the power of operations research for the Census Bureau. This massively complex, robust, and reliable system was delivered at scale, all at once, and was able to provide 7.5 million routes to over 300,000 enumerators, corresponding to approximately 350 million planned visits over the 12 weeks of the NRFU operation.
The efficiency difference between 2010 and 2020 equates to about 80 fewer hours of work for each of our 300,000 enumerators, a total reduction of approximately 27 million hours, with the associated cost savings in hourly wages.
Completing the entire 64 million cases at 2010 efficiency would have taken 85 million more miles than our actual 2020 mileage.
For the 2010 census, we needed 494 physical area offices. In 2020, the efficiencies brought about by Mojo and other changes to field operations helped reduce this number to 248.
Ours is a spectacular example for every other U.S. and worldwide department, agency, and industry. They too can transform their most important and mission-critical functions. It can be done. Despite the challenges of a pandemic and natural disasters, coupled with new approaches to field operations like the Mojo Optimizer, we were all counted.
When we think about the census, the first thing we think about is representation. But that's only one small part of what the census does in our local communities. It sets up the criteria for funding, for schools, for roads, for development of hospitals, infrastructure throughout our communities. Without the census data, there would be no way to properly assess those funds.
It's sort of mind-blowing how much a good census count, or frankly, a bad census count, can influence your everyday life. We at the Census Bureau spend a lot of energy and a lot of effort making sure that those counts are as good as we can get them.
And so getting the census right and making sure that enumeration is right, which is where Mojo comes in, is absolutely critical for their success over the next 10 years.
Immigrants, minorities, or lower income areas, those are the communities that really need the benefit of accurate data so funding can flow into those communities. Mojo enabled us to manage a workforce in those areas in an effective way and get a more effective data collection throughout the nation.
Thank you to Informs and the Edelman Committee for choosing our project as a finalist in the 2022 Edelman competition. We are honored to be able to describe our work that transformed our data collection efforts now and into the future.